In this week's lecture, our topic is power and social processes. Our topic here is power in society, but you might be wondering what that means exactly or why it is even important. By way of explanation, I want to take you back to the beginning of the first term, where I told you the story of the collapse of the society that had lived on Easter Island. Of course, one of the most interesting things that emerges from that cautionary tale is the way the inhabitants of Easter Island committed ecological suicide in full knowledge of the facts, as it were. If you remember, what motivated them was the power of their cultural beliefs, that they had to keep raising these monuments to their ancestors, and that their chiefs would take care of things. So there is something very important here about power, namely the power of collective beliefs to override individual intentions or even individual common sense. We've actually been talking about these conceptions of power off and on since the beginning of the course. Think about the pervasive influence of collectively held but unconscious beliefs about African American men as dangerous, or the widespread notions about women's supposedly superior instincts for care and nurture. The other general word we can use to encompass the power of collective beliefs is structure. Structure helps remind us that we are talking about power that is embedded in beliefs and institutions rather than consciously exercised by individuals. The flip side of structure is agency, the power of individuals acting collectively to respond to structural forms of power. That relationship between structure and agency is going to be the underlying theme of this term. In this first half, we'll focus on structure, and in the second half, we'll turn our attention to agency. You can click on the link in this week's folder for How Networks Shape Our Decisions and Our Lives, a short talk by sociologist and physician Nicholas Christakis. I showed you an excerpt from this last term, and its importance lies in clarifying why the influence of collective interests has such a powerful hold over individuals. The key is the way in which social life involves being embedded in social networks that give our lives meaning and structure. Looked at from a different angle, that of the topic of power, we can also see social networks as crucial to an exercise of power over individual choices and actions. As the quotation on this slide indicates, most of us just want to do what everyone else is doing. And that desire to fit into our social network has a strong hold on us. It's a lot more interesting than a conspiracy because no one is to blame, which actually makes it much more powerful. The reason why we aren't in the business of conspiracy theories here is that we are distinguishing between two types of power, formal and informal. By the formal exercise of power, I mean, in a sense, official power. Governments, the criminal code, how Fleming professors evaluate your progress through grades. The informal exercise of power runs in the background of those things I just mentioned, and is, in a sense, the operating system behind their functioning. But it isn't restricted to those official sites. Instead, it is diffused throughout society. Think about the power of personal space, which we explored early in the course. Here, we are talking about exactly what Christakis has his finger on, which is the immense power of social norms, social networks, and, I would add, social structures. Over the next few slides, I'm going to discuss 3 ways through which the collectivity exercises power over individuals: norms of solidarity, structures of authority, bureaucracies. First, norms of solidarity. Of course, we know by now that social relationships follow and are sustained by norms, what we have called the unwritten rules of these interactions. How should we behave in order to keep our relationships going? Especially relationships we are emotionally invested in. We can refer to norms of solidarity to reference how far individuals will go to protect and nurture their social relationships, the sense of us. We know from the historical record and from current sociological research that ordinary people will do just about anything to maintain loyalty and group morale. The bottom line is that norms of solidarity are a powerful driver of group conformity. Whether we are talking about fashion, as in the image on the left, or gang behavior, as shown on the right. Norms of solidarity are at the core of why military training is so effective. Research done on soldiers who have seen combat has revealed that they are primarily motivated by loyalty to their comrades rather than some sense of patriotism. Along with group conformity come boundaries between us and them, which are essential, you might say, in combat situations, but which can also result in groupthink. All kinds of extreme beliefs and behavior to protect one's own tribe against others. If norms of solidarity involve the exercise of power over individuals, even more far-reaching effects can be observed when individuals are immersed in structures that they recognize as sources of authority. So this is the second form of power we are looking at. The image on this slide is from the notorious Milgram experiment that we talked about last term, which was seeking to find out how far people will go to obey or resist orders that are given by someone who seems to have official authority. In the case of the Milgram experiment, the white lab coats, fancy-looking equipment, and the way the experimenters spoke to subjects all combined to create an aura of authority. And within that, an overwhelming proportion of subjects were inclined to follow the orders. Whether it is because we fear punishment, or breaking rules, or being ridiculed, most of us will do as we are told if the person in charge seems to be in charge. And as a kicker, the more our own actions seem to be separated from consequences, the more we are likely to obey that authority. On a macro level, the ultimate structure of authority in terms of its ability to exercise power over the actions of individuals is the phenomenon of bureaucracy. So this is our third form of power over the individual, and not qualitatively different from the last point about structures of authority, but a highly developed manifestation of structures of authority. Because everyone in a bureaucracy can plead that they are playing their assigned roles in the organization, a lot of power can be exercised without anyone seeming directly responsible for it. You can see how far this can go in looking at the example of the Nazi final solution, which resulted in the deaths of millions, but which was carried out by a lot of individuals simply doing their jobs, whether that was running trains or creating detailed lists of those who were interned. The overall result was a massive atrocity, but it was achieved through a huge, efficient bureaucracy populated by a lot of officials obeying their orders. Here we are looking at two photographs of Adolf Eichmann, known as one of the planners and organizers of the Nazi concentration camp system. In the one image, he is in his uniform as a lieutenant colonel in the SS during the Second World War. In the other, he is a balding, mousy-looking man on trial for war crimes after being captured in 1962. What was remarkable about Eichmann was how utterly unremarkable he was. According to political theorist Hannah Arendt, herself a Jew who had fled Hitler's Germany, Eichmann represented what she called the banality of evil, in a memorable phrase from her book Eichmann in Jerusalem. During his war crimes trial, Eichmann did not appear to be some kind of Nazi fanatic or evil genius, nor did he seem to feel any guilt for his actions. Instead, he claimed that he had no responsibility for the crimes he was accused of because he, as a bureaucrat, was simply following orders and doing his job. Psychological testing revealed that he was average in every way. He was what we call a joiner, in that he was always most comfortable within the boundaries and rules of groups and organizations, to the extent that he seemed incapable of thinking for himself. A bit like you and me, actually. Nevertheless, he was executed for war crimes in 1962. Here is a poem about Adolf Eichmann by Canadian poet and musician Leonard Cohen. All there is to know about Adolf Eichmann: eyes, medium; hair, medium; weight, medium; height, medium; distinguishing features, none; number of fingers, 10; number of toes, 10; intelligence, medium. What did you expect? Talons? Oversized incisors? Green saliva? Madness? Just to wrap up, we've been talking here about power in society. Specifically, the power of collective beliefs and norms to influence individual motivations and actions. No one likes to hear this from a sociologist, by the way, because we all like to think of ourselves as free agents of our own choice. And in fact, a good deal of our culture tells us that we are. Just think for a moment, though, about how often people willingly do things that will ultimately work against their interests. We are not so different from the original inhabitants of Easter Island after all. There is good news here too. In the same way that people can be influenced by the kinds of power relations that we have discussed, they are also quite capable of resisting or subverting power, and they do it all the time. We'll get to that in the second half of the course. Thanks for listening in.